Hello and welcome to the first of this series of videos about the historic 1946 season of Jackie Robinson and the Montreal Royals, the first integrated team affiliated with the majors in the 20th century. There should be a new video every other week discussing what happened to Jackie and the team 69 years ago, so make sure you check back here frequently. Let's recap the first couple of weeks of spring training. Jackie arrived late for camp. He had all sorts of trouble getting from his California home to Florida. He and Rachel, his wife, got bumped from 2 flights to make room for white passengers. They had to make a long bus trip in really awful conditions. And when they finally got to Florida, Jackie was beside himself. He wanted to drop everything and go home. He was convinced to stay, and he finally took the field on March 4th, 3 days after camp opened. It was a real media frenzy when Jackie took to the field. He spent most of his first practice posing for photographs and answering reporters' questions. Meanwhile, the other black player signed by the Royals during the off-season, a pitcher by the name of John Wright, just did his business without being bothered. Jackie was truly the star of this integration experiment. Integration hit its first speed bump the very next day. The Royals were spending the first week of camp in a town called Sanford before moving on to Daytona Beach for the balance of spring. Sources don't agree, but either there was a phone call made to the Dodgers offices or a delegation from Sanford came to the house occupied by Jackie and John. But one thing is clear though, they weren't welcome in Sanford, and that very evening the 2 African American players and their entourage left for Daytona Beach. They were basically ran out of town. Jackie knew he was under constant scrutiny. About 3 days into camp, veteran New York reporter Dan Daniel wrote that he wasn't international league caliber, but that John Wright was. So Robinson tried to do too much, and he ended up hurting his arm trying to show it was strong enough to play shortstop. The coach wanted to give Jackie some time off, but Branch Rickey, the president and GM of the Dodgers, the man who had chosen Jackie, who had handpicked Jackie to be the first African American in the majors if all went well, personally intervened, telling Jackie he couldn't take any time off, that he had to ignore pains and injuries, and he just had to go back out there and practice like everyone else. Not a lot of positive happened in that first week of camp, but it's worth noting that on March 8th, the Dodgers played the very first game at City Island Ballpark, the main stadium in Daytona Beach, where the stands were integrated. Whites and blacks were side by side in the stands for the first time, prelude to what would happen on the field a few days later. Week 2 was not as eventful as the first one. The Royals faced an opponent other than the Dodgers for the first time. They played the other Brooklyn AAA affiliate, the St. Paul Saints of the American Association, 4 times in 4 days. The Dodgers had an enormous network of farm clubs back then, 21 teams in total, and that caused a problem in spring training of 1946. It was the first post-World War II camp. The players who had enlisted were coming back, and the majors had a policy that every player that belonged to a club and had served overseas had to be given a shot in spring training. So new Royals manager Clay Hopper had 70 players in camp by mid-March, and at that moment managers had no assistants, no pitching coach or nothing, so he had to ask for reinforcements. While we're on the topic of newly minted Royals manager Clay Hopper, let's talk a little bit about him. He was 43, had no experience at that level, and was a native of Mississippi, a fiercely segregationist state. It was probably part of Branch Rickey's grand plan to have a Southerner manage the team, so the Southern-born players would follow his example. A lot of things have been said about Hopper, including that he allegedly begged Branch Rickey not to make him manage African Americans. Some believe he said that he would be a marked man in Mississippi if he did that he couldn't go back home. That's probably not true, for 2 reasons. A, he accepted the position as Royals manager after Jackie was signed by the team, so he knew what he was getting into. And it is believed that Hopper made good money owning a plantation back home, and that he didn't really need his baseball salary to live. So under those circumstances, you'd have to believe that if it had been that bad for him, he would have turned down the position. Anyway, I'll have more on him in upcoming episodes, as he is a central yet very, very controversial figure of that whole experiment of integration. The second week of camp was rough for Jackie Robinson, who was moved to second base because of his bad arm. But his arm hurt so bad he couldn't even make relays from second, so they moved him to first base, where he had never played. He made a ton of errors, and that made his struggles at the plate even worse. Meanwhile, it was smooth sailing for John Wright. There was a long article about him in La Presse newspaper in Montreal that said that he was a virtual lock to make the team, but neither man had played in a real preseason game up to that point. That happened on March 17th, and that'll be the topic of my next video. And the best way to ensure you won't miss any of my videos is by subscribing to this channel, or better yet, you follow the Royals 46 season page on Twitter. The link is right below. I thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.